Hi guys, welcome to The Trade, episode 61. Today I have a hangout with Dave Dellecese. I said it right this time. Yes. And well, we're just going to also be hitting up some deep, dark news that's been happening over the past couple months here. And oh my God, we've got some doozies for you. And then we'll be doing an interview with Dave there at the end, so that way we can kind of wrap it up on a little lighter note with some better comics than what we're going to talk about today. So Dave, thanks for joining me.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Dave does several comics. He does Lace and Lily. It's an all-ages friendly comic. You can find it at laceandlily.com. I'll have all the links for his stuff down in the doobly-doo. And right now he is running a Kickstarter for a comic series called Holidays. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about Holidays first here before we launch into some of the news?
Sure. Holidays is a humor book, ages 15 and up. Holidays is the bar where all of the mythical characters like Santa, the Tooth Fairy, Cupid, the Easter Bunny, and their friends go when they're done being kitty icons at the end of the day to go have a few drinks, commiserate, and then usually get into a bunch of trouble. Each holiday story is kind of self-contained, and we've got about six so far, and a crossover special with another indie comic called The Devil and Mr. Gandhi by Pat McEwen. And we're doing a Kickstarter for a new edition of Holidays called the All Krampus Spectacular, which is a jam comic book featuring multiple stories by different creators, different artists, and featuring different takes on Krampus, who, for those who don't know, Krampus is the kind of half-man, horned, hoofed antithesis of Santa, who kind of takes all of the naughty children and beats them with birch reeds and puts them in baskets and brings them back to hell. And so we wanted, when we started Holidays, one of the questions that people would ask is, oh, when are you going to do Krampus? So we finally decided to do a Krampus issue, and instead of doing one story, we're doing three stories to do different types of Krampuses. And now we're, as of this recording, we're about $49 away from hitting our Kickstarter goal to get a print edition of the All Krampus Spectacular into people's hands. So please feel free to check it out. We got different rewards that include the individual comic. They include a trade paperback collection of earlier holiday stories. There's one that includes the crossover special that we did with The Devil and Mr. Gandhi, which is a great indie comic about the Devil and Gandhi being roommates, which I highly recommend. We've got great art teams on the All Krampus Spectacular. My cohort in crime on Holidays and Lacey and Lily, Andrew Zielinski, Pat McEwen, Edward Yancey, and I do a little bit of art chores myself in this one. So it's a good time. It's a fun time.
All right. Well, we'll have links down to that Kickstarter down in the doobly-doo as well for everybody. I'm definitely backing it myself.
Oh, thank you.
Tip of the hat to you, sir. Tip of the hat. Okay, so the news stories. Oh my gosh, guys. All right, links down in the doobly-doo for some of this, because this is nice hot pile of flaming garbage. All right. First news story, we'll start off a little light. Hey kids, harassment in comics. Okay, over off of bookriot.com. Again, links down in the doobly-doo, so that way everybody can check them out. They have a very long list of people that have reported harassment in comics, and this kind of leads into the next story as well, because it is a hot pile of garbage. We've reported before a time and again here on the podcast and several other places about people being driven out of comics, even up to the point where they've quit comics altogether because of harassment, sexual harassment, and rape. And I know of several creators personally that have had to deal with years of trauma from this shit. Now, this particular news story actually doubles down and names people. You have links, and there are over 50 people listed as both being harassed and harassers. So there's a lot of verifiable evidence, because this has been coming up in the news the past, several weeks now, about people being harassed in politics, in Hollywood, in journalism, and it's growing because our voices are needing to be heard. The Me Too movement helped push this forward. And overall, I have to say it's about damn time. It's about damn time we put this mirror up there to just highlight that this behavior is wrong. And there's no two ways about it. Anybody who looks up to anybody nowadays, you got to really evaluate your heroes. There are some people on this list I never knew personally had done some of this horse shit. Now, don't get me wrong. We all make mistakes. We are people. But you should at least own up to the mistakes, try to rectify what you can, and help people heal. And try to show that publicly. Being a person that makes comics, especially if you're a bigger name person, I think you should really make a public effort of showing restitution in some way to both the people that you have committed heinous acts against and to the community at large. I don't know how else to put this. This is close to my heart. I have been harassed before. I'm a female. That alone means I have received harassment through most of my life in some form or other. And I could highlight some people and put them on blast, but there's no point. They've at least made restitution to me. And that's fantastic. And that's a place to start to grow and to heal. But this is definitely a societal problem. And it's not just in comics, but this list in particular lists our problem in our industry. And we need to band together to help correct this behavior, because we're allowing this to happen. We're encouraging this to happen. The whole old school mentality, oh, boys will be boys, is garbage. It's a bullshit mentality. And it's time for it to be over. And I'm hoping as we bring this mirror up with these different news stories and comic stories that are talking about rape, harassment, ridicule, shaming people when they've done nothing wrong, I think we can learn as a society. This is a very tough time for all of us right now. And I think we can all learn to grow and be better people through this, as long as we keep that mirror up and remember that this has to stop, that this behavior is wrong. Just because somebody is there in your comic space doesn't give you right to touch them, to make lewd remarks to them, or anything else. You just need to be respectful to your fellow man. Treat others as you want to be treated. And I know this is a heavy, heavy topic, but we've all got to face it, and it's time to face it. Sorry for being such a downer there, Dave.
No, you're right. It's not something that's isolated to one medium or one industry like you were talking about. I mean, just looking at the newspapers or any TV, news reports as of late, you'd be blind to not realize that it's a larger societal problem. And you mentioned the Me Too movement, and I think that whether anything that can drum up enough courage amongst people who, for whatever reason or reasons in their individual cases, have not felt secure to talk about these things before. Sometimes with anything, it takes one person to make a change, or to encourage other people. So I think the more people that took part in that Me Too movement and came forward, um, just added strength for others to do the same. And I'm sure it was very hard for any of them to finally like admit to what was going on. But um, you know, not to use a cliche of strength in numbers, but it does build that um, assurance that like, hey, you're not alone. So the fact that all these people came forward, because you hear all these things all the time, and I've heard people in conversation, or you see it online all the time, and please excuse the cat in the background. One of my cats is meowing, so if you hear that in the background, I'm sorry for interrupting the heavy tone of our conversation right now as he tries to get into a room he's not supposed to. But I think that anything that can build up that much security in folks. Yeah, that's right. I was saying about how I was talking to somebody, and of course, people always like to fall back on the, I don't want to say the word argument, but the critique of, well, why did they come? Why did they wait to come forward? And it's like, well, because they felt like they were, they had reasons that they didn't come forward prior in many instances. They were afraid, or they were afraid of repercussions. I mean, there's times where where any of us, I'm sure, are at work, and we've got to, we want to say something, but we're like, you know what, I don't want to lose my job, I got to get paid, so I'm just gonna, not in terms of like harassment, but I'm just, you want to say something about like, well, that's crappy, and but you don't. And there, whatever reason these people had for not coming forward before, they had those reasons. But seeing other people finally step out of the shadows and say, hey, this happened, is encouragement, and it gives them strength to do the same. And I think that what it does is it helps shine a light of how widespread, you mentioned that, as a societal problem that this is. And it's not, I think also it depends on how people take, how people take things in or react to things. Like, I see people who get, and I suppose online brings out the worst in people, at times, but you see people who are like so upset that people are coming forward with these things. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, now it's out in the open, it's in the light, you can have conversations about it, you can I won't say attack it, but you can take a look at things now that it's all out there and say like, wow, this has been happening, and this has been happening to many for a long time. What are the reasons for it? Why is this tolerated? What can be done to make workplaces, home spaces, recreation, I mean, you just make society a more comfortable place. And whatever, I'm sure people will critique that assessment, by me, but it's just like, shouldn't everybody be entitled to be able to get up in the morning and be able to, whether it's go to work or go to the store or go to a park or whatever, go to a movie or whatever, and be allowed the same, freedom to be themselves without having to deal with, some larger issue like harassment or bullying? I mean, yeah, I think of like, I have several kids, and I think of, the conversation that we have to have. They're young, they're like elementary and lower, like lower elementary and younger. But we have conversations about personal space. Okay, like, okay, you got to step back. You're invading somebody's personal space. And think about the bubble around you. And it's I really think that now that all this is out there, that whether it's comics, whether it's the film industry, whether it's, I mean, politics, maybe a whole other ball game at getting people to talk about it. But I mean, okay, it's out there now. So let's actually, so talk about it, figure out what's, how to make things better, how to make it so that, you're, find a way to make environments where, 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 months from, or 10 years from now, people don't have to, be coming forward that, like, hey, this happened in 2017, this happened in 2018, and 2019. Let's, you have a chance now to rewrite the ship, maybe, and I know it's not a perfect world. I know sometimes I'm accused of being too idealistic, but I think there's an opportunity to be better. And while we're talking comics, I think you and I were talking before this started, that I think that if comics or characters like Superman have taught us anything, it's to try and be better. And I think that sometimes people don't necessarily want to try and be better, and maybe it's time that we realize that we're not as good as we thought, and it's time to find ways to be better. That was kind of a ramble, but hopefully you got my point.
No, that's fine. No, I agree. I believe that we need that ideology to be out there, to be better. That we know we're human. We know we're going to make mistakes. We know we have some behaviors we need to correct, mentalities that we need to correct, to refocus ourselves. And this next news story that we're about to dip into is talking about some of those mentalities. So let's go ahead and jump into that real quick here. And again, links down in the doobly-doo, guys. But
I'm gonna start using doobly-doo in my everyday vernacular now. I like that so much. The doobly-doo.
Yes. Doobly-doo. All right, guys. Well, I got sent this link about 2 months ago, and I've kind of been sitting on it a little bit because I needed some other people's input on it. It's been going on for a little bit here. Most people that have been online fairly frequently know of the online persona of Vox Day, aka Theodore Beale. He is a neo-Nazi. There's no way around that. And Mr. Neo-Nazi has decided to write his own comic book. And he's actually gotten some legitimate writer to back him on this, and that's why it's kind of made our news desk here. He's decided to make his own comic called Alt Hero. And I'm going to link the news stories down below. I do not want to link to his campaign specifically. If you guys want to look at it, that's fine. But he had to actually go through an alternative fundraising site, which means that that's shady as fuck, because there's a lot of ways to quote-unquote raise money and claim you've gotten the funding when you haven't. Inflate your numbers, so to speak. But he basically wants to write a comic to more or less be a fucking troll. That's no other way I can look at it or phrase it. His own words here, direct quote from him. What I found the most interesting was the idea that anything short of an undefined success, which we all know will be redefined and redefined as Alt Hero meets with the usual metrics of success over time, is tantamount to sad humiliation. Think about how twisted one's psyche has to be to make that connection, and what a crushing fear of failure one would have to have in order to think that way. It's the heart of the SJW, which is not only terrified of failure, but terrified that someone somewhere will be successful doing something of which the SJW does not approve. Of course, SJWs will have good reason to be terrified of Alt Hero, because they know they are the true villains and the enemy in the culture war. Now, Vox Day specifically touts that anybody that currently follows comics is an SJW. I've read 4 or 5 stories from this guy interviewing this guy, and there are no less short of him basically showing his ass to the world and how short his knowledge is. because the fact that comics were originally made and written to show a societal mirror of minorities and being, you know, treated as, you know, decent people. And instead, he wants to make a set of triggering white characters that smoke cigarettes, wear Confederate flag costumes, and combat left-wing protesters. He believes that you using your constitutional right to protest is something to battle, that's villainry. This sad troll, this very sad troll here, oh my god, he, you know, I think he has legitimately raised enough money for his indie comic, and that's fine. Props to him for that. I do not believe the inflated numbers on his raising page by any stretch of the imagination. But he basically wants to make something to spark outrage amongst progressive comic book fans. So basically, he wants to expend his energy on being a troll and a bully. And this is funny ass shit as much as it is stupid as fuck. I don't know how else to look at this other than laugh and shake my head at this giant moron. Because he believes that people standing up for social issues is what's wrong with our current society. Being for, you know, helping minorities and wanting to actually continue some of our social programs that actually help feed the poor and the sick and the disabled and our elderly and help, you know, our kids with their education, and us protesting that is somehow comic book villainy. Oh dear. Okay, Dave, give me your thoughts on this, please. Oh my God.
I'm not, you know, first of all, I have to start with, you know, by saying that I was not familiar with the person here, the Vox Day person. I was totally unfamiliar when you, as you were talking about the story and sent me the article beforehand, so it was new to me. The thing about comics is there, you do come across critiques, especially in the past several years. I think maybe not even that long, but there seems to be this like rising voice that comics have suddenly out of nowhere started delving, you know, to tackling social issues that they have no place in doing because they've never done it before. And the thing is when you go back, comics have pretty much done that from the beginning. I mean, you look at, I mean, we'll use Superman again as the example. I mean, because Superman's kind of like the, you know, the you know,
icon,
father of the superhero industry. So, I mean, you go back to those early appearances in 1938, 39. I don't remember if it was stretched into 40, but I mean, you look at those early Superman appearances, and he was dealing with, he wasn't fighting supervillains at that point. I don't even think he was really fighting, like, you know, Nazis or spies at that point. There might have been some spies in there in the late 30s, but for the most part, I mean, he was, as a symptom, or as a you know, in the context of the times, he was dealing with concerns that were the concerns of people living in urban America at the time. You know, I mean, by the 30s, you know, we were in the early 20th century. We had been, you know, the United States had kind of moved past that whole frontier time of the cowboy, and people were, you know, congregating more into cities. And so when comics came about and the superhero genre came about and Superman, Superman was dealing with with those concerns and issues, whether it was urban crime, whether it was corrupt politicians, greedy industrialists, bad working conditions for miners is one story that I can think of. An abusive husband in another one. I mean, I think he puts the guy like through the wall or something like that. It might have even been in his first appearance. So it's always been there. So the argument that it's suddenly a new thing for comic creators to have social issues within their pages, I feel kind of falls flat, because it seems historically, whether you want to go to the 30s and 40s when they were dealing with those issues in urban America, or then even leading into the war and dealing with issues of the war. Because if you go back and you look at some issues of All-Star Comics, which is where the Justice Society of America, the precursor to the Justice League, was, you'll find some stories in there. It's kind of the Justice Society stories are kind of a mixed bag at times. You'll find stories in there that actually deal with the topic of tolerance for like religion, race, background. I'm trying to recall the exact story. I want to say it was called A Cure for the World. And the entire story was based upon, it starts out with a little boy getting bullied. And Dr. Midnight, one of the members of the Justice Society, comes in and asks these boys why they're picking on this other boy, and it was because he went to a different church than they did. And that kind of set the story into motion, with the Justice Society talking, going on this adventure, which was, a mask, so to speak, for this idea of, we're all one society. And it might actually, I'm trying to think if it's that story or another story, but it actually, if it's the one I'm thinking of, it actually ends with like this group shot of the Justice Society with all these people of different backgrounds and races, like together, either reciting the pledge or just reaffirming, that we're all Americans and things like that. So I mean, and that was the 40s. You had Superman in the late 30s. You go to the 1970s when you had Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams doing their iconic Green Arrow, Green Lantern run, and dealing with some really very relevant issues at the time. And they're still great stories.
Yeah.
They dealt with a lot of the social issues of the time. So it's not new. I just think that I think that the discourse right now in society has really it's certainly not civil, but it's really ramped up, and people love to find reasons to get angry with anything that's not within their purview. That's just kind of odd. And again, maybe I'm being a bit milk toast is the word. I know it's kind of an old phrase, but it's like it does really seem to me like no matter what it is, whether it's comics or films, because I hear people who won't watch films because of a particular actor's views. I think I mentioned a film once. I don't remember what it was. It might have been something from 30 years ago, and somebody said to me "Oh, I don't watch that because he's a big lib," and it was okay, well, all right, but it's it's kind of really weird, the kind of lines in the sand that people will make for things like that. And I'm always kind of a little taken aback by that. And I think that it's only gotten harsher. I mean, like I said, there seems to be no, I don't want to say no, but very little civil discourse anymore. You don't have a lot of conversations. There seems to be a lot of people who just want to get other people angry. And you mentioned that this guy's entire intention with this book is to annoy people, to get under their skin and to really bother them. And I don't know, again, I'm not a working industry professional. I'm an indie comic guy, but I feel like when you're going to make something, you really should make something with a passion, you know what I mean, a passion for what you can create. I mean, even if you didn't, maybe even if you didn't come up with something, maybe you're being a paid assignment for something, you know. But if you're an artist or a writer, you want to give of yourself to it. It seems like anytime your motivation is I'm doing something out of spite, it kind of, to me, seems kind of disingenuous from the beginning, because your reason for doing it is not because you have this wonderful story you want to tell. You're doing it because you want to piss people off. And I personally just don't really understand that kind of a motivation for doing something.
Yeah, overall, oh, I've got my cat now.
Maybe they're yelling at each other, you know.
Yeah. We will have cats this issue. No, overall, I completely agree with you. I mean, why devote your time and energy to being a troll? I honestly don't get it myself. I think you could do better by promoting other issues. If you really want to put your time and effort into making a story, why not make a good story? You know, you're going to put money, you're going to put energy into this, and I can guarantee you and me, we're going to see this in the trash heap of the history books, you know? It'll be mentioned because it's garbage. And it's garbage that came out during a very heated time in our history here.
I just hope that comics aside, you know, that I hope that there's a coming back from that cliff, you know, because, you know, it does really seem, and this is just a personal note, that, you know, it's so hard to have any kind of conversation these days without it escalating very quickly. And I don't know when exactly everything went off the rails, because every day I wake up and it feels like we're going more off the rails. But
let's see how far to the desert we can get with this train.
Yeah, I feel like we've already, you know, the train's already off the cliff and in flames, and I just keep wondering what's going to happen next.
Where's the bottom? Where's the bottom again?
Exactly.
I thought we hit the bottom. No? Okay, here we go.
There are certainly things that feel like that, and just when you think it can't be topped. But I really hope that's, you know, in the larger scheme of like society, there is some coming back from it, because it seems like I don't remember 10, 15 years ago, you know, like everything being as completely vicious as it seems to be today. And I think that's the best word I can think of, is vicious. And it's prime examples when people do things just to try and you know, really like get to other people or troll them. You use the phrase, you know, like trolling them. I mean, I just don't understand the purpose of that, or what that really serves, and in the end what good it does. Because, you know, really at the end of the day, like, look, I'm getting really like idealistic and philosophical here, but we don't, you know, none of us have a lot of time on this earth. So A, wouldn't you want to like leave it a better place? And B, don't you want to not spend it constantly fighting and being like a jerk to people? You know, wouldn't you want to just, you know, make the world a nice place? And again, maybe that's too much Christopher Reeve Superman for me, but it's just, I really feel like that's how it should be. And somehow I feel like we just like careened totally off kilter.
Well, I have a theory. And what it is I think several places have failed with their education. Honestly, I believe education has failed in some instances with some people, and that's why they no longer know how to actually properly debate items.
Critical thinking, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You know, critical thinking has been thrown to the side of memorization and strict mimeograph, you know, repeat what I say, you know, and they're not allowing students, you know, even from our group, you know, our generation and before, are finally having to step up and say, we want logical, actual debates and thinking here. We don't mind if you want to say your piece, but then I get to say mine, and you don't get to drown me out in yelling nonsense and bullshit. Because that's how we actually have a civil discourse, you know? I can disagree with you on several instances, you know? And
Yeah.
you can disagree with me on mine, but that doesn't invalidate our stances. Yes, we can hold contradictory terms, you know, within ourselves, morals and interests. But again, that doesn't disclude actual civil discourse, and that's what's gone out the window, I believe, is
Agree.
logical
I
thinking,
agree.
and it's just straight up knowing how to actually logically think and come to a conclusion. And if you're proven wrong, you know, if you're actually proven wrong by somebody, they can give you hard facts, they can give you things to then turn around and reference to correct yourself, being a big enough person to step up and do that and
And
admit
say,
you're wrong.
hey, I was wrong, you know, or I was mistaken, or hey, you know what, you know more about this subject than I do, so thank you. You know, I didn't realize
Yeah.
that. I mean, there's, yeah, maybe there's a lot of ego involved too, that people just can't, you know, and it's not everybody, but there's a large amount of people who just cannot admit, you know, that maybe there's something they hadn't thought of, or another way to look at something, and you're right, it all plays a role as to why everything is, you know, there isn't that like back and forth discussion in a lot of matters. It's who can yell the loudest, you know.
Yeah, it's just become a echo chamber, like you put before. Of this is just the only thing I want to hear,
Yeah.
and you know what? That's why I go ahead and still listen to other news sites, even if I disagree with them, because you know. So I will listen to Vox Day
You're
at
being
least.
well rounded. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. At least I'll listen to what he has to say, but that doesn't mean I agree with it.
Yeah, you're just trying to get different perspectives, and I think that's what you hope everybody would do. You don't have to agree with it, but at least you can get different perspectives, and then you know you can still believe what you believe, but it gives you a better understanding what other people are, for right or for wrong, you know what I mean, are thinking, and I
Hmm.
think that helps
Exactly.
everybody going into a conversation. So, man, we're solving all the world's problems tonight.
Yeah, and see, yeah, definitely. Well, comics is a conversation. Like you know, I've reiterated several times, and you've said too. You know, comics is a mirror. We use it frequently to tell stories about, you know, personal stories about things that have happened to us, or more philosophical stories. You know, using fantasy characters to show injustices in society happening. And when somebody says that we can't, or we're misusing that mirror, um, yeah, no, I don't see it happening. I see the opposite happening. I believe Vox Day here will misuse the mirror. I believe it'll become a magnifying glass for him and burn his ass. That's the best way I can think of it happening. Because, you know, okay, you know what? Go ahead and put your voice out there. Go ahead and put your story out there. Let's see how much it actually sells. Let the numbers actually say the truth. That very few people think the way you do. But that does not invalidate your story. But it means that you're have a very narrow mind scope. Jesus, Mary fucking Christ. Uh, uh, you know, it's assholes like this that have constantly told me, get back in the kitchen, woman. And I looked at them, I'm like, oh, and you're not allowed in mine, bitch. But, you know, it's just, it boggles my mind in many regards that they think that this is the way life needs to be. And in this current dumpster fire that is 2017 branching into 2018, with the Cheeto in chief making things just fucking worse. Oh boy, when will this dumpster fire end?
There's a I think there's a blindness to nostalgia, and people look back at things that aren't necessarily good times, not necessarily the good old days, but they're always looking through these lenses of nostalgia, and they're looking at the wrong things. And so when they try to, for whatever reason, it can skew the perception, and you're not looking at the world accurately. So, when you hear all these things about the way it used to be and we need to do this, but the world isn't always the way that you remember it. And media plays a big role in that. There's writings of a young scholar named Ryan Lazardi, who specializes in nostalgia, which is all very interesting, because we look back. He writes a lot about how the media informs the way we look at the past, so that even if we lived through something, we identify the past so much with the media that we consumed that we don't always look at our own past or society's past accurately enough. And I think that does tend to happen a lot on this grander scale of what we're talking about, and people's perceptions of what the world was or they thought it was get very skewed. If you look back at a lot of old movies, like old MGM movies of the 30s and 40s, there was a movie series that I could think of particularly. It was called the Andy Hardy series, and it starred a young Mickey Rooney as a teenager, and it was Andy and his family, and they were like in small town America and everything. Mickey got into trouble but always got out of it and saved the day. They're great movies. They're a lot of fun, and you can look back at them very wide-eyed nostalgically, but they weren't real. I mean, they have incredible charm to them, but they're not real. They're what Louis B. Mayer, who ran MGM, they're what his idea of at the time of an idealized America was. So you look back, using that as an example, but you look back at this media, in that case film, and you're looking at somebody else's idea of what the perfect world was at that time. And I think and that can be anything. That can be novels, that can be films, that can be comics. You know what I mean? Like the world of comics, and you let's pick up a copy of 1959 Batman or 1964, like Superman, and it's very white bread, for lack of a better term. It's very perfect. But the world wasn't that way. I mean, you look at the early 60s, and and looking at a Superman comic from like the early 60s and what was actually going on in the early 60s in the real world are two very different things. So you always have to keep that in mind too, that while any medium like comics can or films can reflect the times, they also may not, based on, they could also skew our perception of the past as well. So there's just an interesting, God, we could talk about that for hours. I mean, it's a fascinating topic to me. So sorry, total ramble. I apologize.
No, that's fine. All right. Well, why don't we go on to a different ramble now, and let's talk about you. All right. Well, Dave, why don't you just go ahead and tell everybody your background in comics? Where'd you start?
Well, I grew up a comic fan. I grew up reading a lot of Disney comics, actually. I was a big fan of Uncle Scrooge comics, and Donald Duck comics. Oh, yeah. And that eventually segued into reading DC comics and superhero comics. My preference, I like a lot of the Silver Age, Golden Age stuff. So I'm a big fan of reading old material, especially because, if you couldn't tell from a lot of my boring anecdotes in the course of this conversation, I like being able to look at stuff with a historical context. So I like being able to go back and read Justice Society stories during World War II and kind of putting together what was going on in the world at the time, or stories, DC stories from the 70s or the 60s and what was happening then. But anyway, so I was always been a comic fan, and I worked in journalism for most of my adult career, and had been chatting with an artist friend of mine who had been itching to do a something, and I pitched a couple ideas his way, and one of those ideas was a thing called Holidays, which ended up becoming the series that we did. Holidays is a comedy series about the bar where all the mythical icons from Santa, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny go to hang out. And we kind of looked at it as a way to do our own kind of sitcom. Each issue is its own little episode. They can who these characters are. You know who Santa is. Our version may be a little twisted, but you know who Santa is. You know who the Easter Bunny is. And these are just kind of absurd takes on them. And we've done several issues that are available on the Kindle, on Comixology, and available digitally. We collected the first 5 of those into a trade paperback collection sometime back, and now we're doing one focusing on Krampus. Krampus is the hooved, half man, half goat, half beast antithesis of Santa, and a lot of people, who had read Holidays had asked us, when are you going to do a Krampus issue? So we decided to finally do it, and we brought in some other folks to help. I mean, Andrew Zielinski, who's the artist who I co-created Holidays with, is on board. We also got Pat McEwen, who does The Devil and Mr. Gandhi, about the Devil and Gandhi being roommates. Ed Yancey, who's done a book called Tales from the Sketch Club, which is like a horror kind of book. And Ed did one of the stories in the book. I did, Andy and I teamed up. I did the pencils, and Andy did the inks and colors for one of the stories. And we just did multiple different stories of Krampus that involved the Holidays gang. And we're looking to do a small print run of it. And we, as of this, as I think I said at the beginning, we're about $49 away as of this recording. So hopefully shortly after people watch this, maybe we'll go over the edge. Only not over the edge like society itself, as we were talking earlier, just in a more comfortable edge. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been fun as a comic reader growing up to be able to now as an adult be able to tell stories. We also do, aside from Holidays, Andrew and I work together on an all ages title called Lacey and Lily, which is about a young girl named Lacey and her dog Lily, who discover a pair of super suits in her grandmother's old trunk, and when they put them on, they give them superpowers, and so they become this crime-fighting duo and stop bullies and fight alien invasions and weird supervillains and things like that, and save the day. And it's kind of a with the underlying theme, of course, that for kids especially, that that what makes a hero is who they are, not the suit that gives them the superpower. So that's a very fun title. That's, like I said, that's all ages. Holidays, just because of the bar setting and it's more adult humor, is more like we say that's the PG-13 or the age 15 and up for Holidays, just because of some of the stuff that it gets into.
All right. Overall, how long have you been doing comics?
I want to say we've been doing it a few years now. I wish I want to say something like 2013, something like that.
2013, right around there. So just about 4 years, roughly.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Well, I wouldn't call you an industry expert, but you do have history in it and making it, at least a couple years under your belt. You at least have some say in things. Overall, do you think it's been a fulfilling experience?
It has, and I think that we've learned as we've gone on too. It's been very fulfilling. Because there's just something about, no matter the media, whether it was comics or standard like narrative, prose book or a film or anything, there's just something about creating. There's something about taking something from your head and finding a way to make it real. whether that's in the form of artwork, or like say, or finding all of the words to create a well-told text story, or like I said, or a play or anything. There's just something about being able to take everything that's running around up here and being able to pull it out and shape it and make it something that you can show other people. And when you can do that, there is an incredibly just rewarding and fulfilling feeling that comes with it. Even if in this particular case it's about a bunch of holiday characters sitting in a bar drinking, there's still something fulfilling about getting the story out there.
Definitely. Overall, do you think you've become a better person making comics, honestly?
I think I've learned a lot, and this is me being very candid and open. I think when we did the first, being very honest, when we did the first holiday story, I think that we kind of did it as a with the intention that it was kind of like a done in one, like that was going to be it. We were just going to do this one comic and that was it. And the idea was based on a short film. I had originally been studying like screenwriting and filmmaking in college. I ending up changing to broadcast and journalism. But when I was studying screenwriting and filmmaking, I remember I was driving in a car with a friend of mine, and she was really into film too. And so we were batting ideas back and forth, and I had come up with the idea for this. I want to do like a holiday special, but it's for adults and it's a comedy. And I'd basically come up with this idea in the car with her as we were talking back and forth. And I wanted to do as a short film in college, and I never did it. But the whole concept was like, oh, let's turn kids, like holiday specials on its ear, and this one's for adults, and Santa gets drunk on Christmas Eve and can't make the deliveries, and it sounds like something that like a college student would probably come up with. And so when Andrew and I were talking about doing a comic, and I pitched this holidays idea, I basically pitched him that short film idea. And looking back at it, it was sort of, I think you can kind of tell that it was sort of like it was intended originally as a done in one. And even more so, I mean, you could even look at the first, I guess, more than just that first issue. You could look at the first like 2 stories, really, and see that we were still really figuring out our footing. The book seems a little more, those first 2 stories to me, and maybe I'm just really overanalyzing, and maybe like, Pat McEwen would watch this would tell me like, dude, stop. But I feel like, it was one of those where it's like, it was just like telling story, like pushing the envelope and doing these really, having these characters do these like risque things and going over the top. And then like a few stories in, we were just kind of like, that's not like sustainable. I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? We were both kind of like, we just kind of like totally took the steering wheel and went like this. And I think when you look at all of, if you were to sit down and look at all of the holiday stories along, you can kind of see where we kind of, I don't want to say tone it down because it makes it sound like we went really milquetoast and tame, but like we kind of like had this realization like, oh my gosh, this is like our ability to do like a sitcom with these characters, and we can like give them more unique personalities, and they're not just these like stereotypes, which is I think in the beginning what you saw. Santa was, in the beginning he was drinking, and the Tooth Fairy's kind of like floozy, and like, St. Patty's kind of grungy, and all those things. But we kind of, as quickly as we could in those, kind of turned the ship around to kind of do just weird, fun, absurd, sitcom-y hijinks. And I think that's where we're at now, and I'm very happy to be there, because I look back on the original concept, and like, well, it was, for what it was fine, but I don't think you could sustain it that way. You kind of had to start fleshing out the characters a little more, and making them characters that you want to kind of, through the pages, hang around with or drink with, as opposed to just being those like extreme stereotypes. I don't think you can make that last very long, just from a writing standpoint. So that's me being completely, maybe it's the being late at night as we're recording and being completely honest here and candid. So So there you go.
But no, that's fantastic. I love seeing the growth of other creators through their work, you know, being able to actually figure themselves out and figure their story out, and you see it flesh out more as it goes. Um, if you had somebody brand new approach you about making their story, what advice would you give them?
I would tell them probably um, tell your story, not somebody else's, because there's always that trap that you want to fall into where it's like, what's what's popular or what's trendy, you know, and try to work those things in, or to be somebody else. You know, I think of like in college when I was really writing, you know, film scripts for film classes, and you know and there were so many times when I can look back at it and go like, oh, that's right, that was when I was really into Kevin Smith, you know what I mean? And I can tell just from like, you know, like looking at my schoolwork from, you know, from those times. And it's, you know, so to me, with a little bit of age under my belt now, you know, with any medium, I can say like, just be true to who you are. You know, you can look to people for influence, but you don't want to be this person. You want to be you, because you've got your voice and you've got your stories to tell. um, and so A, be true to that. B, um, don't put the undue pressure on yourself. Just give yourself enough pressure to get it done, but don't put so much pressure on yourself that you didn't get it done in a week, or that you wrote it or drew it and you know it needs some work, but you want to just get it done and get it over with. You know, do you know, be true to you also means like, you know, if it means you need a little more time, if you've written a story that you know needs a little, can be better with another afternoon or another week's worth of work to it, give yourself the time to do it. You know, you'll be happier in the end, instead of looking back and going, man, I wish I gave myself another day to work on that, or another week to work on that. I think it was Mark Wade who was quoting Tom Peyer, another great writer, and they work together very often, but they're both great. But who had said that the difference between a good story and a great story is an afternoon. And it's true. If you just take that little bit of extra time, you know, instead of writing it, okay, it's done, you know, you can really make you can really shine it up, so to speak. So be true to yourself, give yourself the time that's needed, and do something that makes you happy. You know, do something that you want to read, watch, you know, listen to, because, you know, there's going to be other people like you. You know, you're never going to please everybody. You know, there is nothing out there in this world, despite what marketers want to tell us, you know, that is for absolutely everybody. So just do something that you like, that you enjoy, that you would want to, you know, like I said, pick up and read, or turn on and watch, or tune in and listen to, and it'll find its audience. And it can be discouraging at times, because, you know, there's a lot out there. There's a plus and minus to the 21st century that we live in. We have all of this opportunity and ability to create and to get things to audiences that we never could 15 years ago or 20 years ago, that the internet and all these resources have provided. But it also means there's a lot more out there. There's a lot more people doing it. And so there is a lot of white noise, for lack of a better term. But it doesn't mean that just because you create something and it doesn't become, you know, an indie film darling or a comic, you know, sensation, that what you're doing doesn't have merit, or that it's not worth doing. If you're doing it for yourself, then it was absolutely worth every single moment of it, and every moment that you got to cherish from it, you know, no matter how many people consumed it. You know, you keep on playing no matter the size of the audience, because the audience that you want to worry about the most is yourself, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to say temper taking that extra time, because sometimes you can take too much too.
That's a great point.
Yeah, sometimes you have to hit okay, you know what? I polished this stone. enough. I need to go ahead and just put it out there. And yeah, it's not going to be the top quality stuff sometimes, especially if it's your first.
Sure, absolutely, and you're right. I should correct that, because I don't mean give yourself all the time in the world, because you could spend years and years and years working on the same thing. And give yourself a deadline, but if you crank out your story in a morning, give yourself an afternoon or another day to look it over, or go, or put it aside, go get a cup of coffee and come back to it the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but setting personal deadlines for yourself is certainly important, because otherwise, yeah, you'll play with things. There was we call it a friend of mine and I used to call it don't George Lucas it, because we talk about like how many times he would go back to work on the original Star Wars trilogy, and he'd make these changes, and then the special edition, and now it's like the special edition, and then it's and it's like, if you could be playing with those movies until the end of time, until he's a head in a jar somewhere, connected to the computer. You just have to kind of get a point where you're like, okay, I gotta let it go, and just let it be free.
Yeah, because that's also how we grow. My first bit of work here, I'm not, I love the story idea of, but I've grown a lot since, first writing it and drawing it and putting it out there, and I've outgrown it now. I've officially ended my latest webcomic, and I'm working on a new one now. It's more of what do you call it, a slice of life.
Oh, awesome.
One.
I love that. I love slice of life stuff.
Yeah, it's I think my perspective, at first when I started working on it, I was like, but everybody else is doing slice of life ones, but I'm like, but my perspective is just as valid as anybody else's.
Exactly.
So I need to go ahead and just do this, put it out there, say, that first one I learned a lot from. I love the character still. I love my little story still. I know it only reached a couple of people, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I still made it. It's still my little very rough and tumble webcomic, and it's still my little treasure, but I learned a lot from just making that, and the year I took to make what I did make of it. Yeah, you learn so much just after the first couple, regardless if it's a strip, a full book, whatever, you learn and you grow. And I think that's part of the fun of making comics in general. Absolutely. Is really that it's fun to make stories.
It is, yes.
It is fun. God, it's fun. And it should get you fired up to make more, and if it's not, if it's starting to become a trudge, well, there are ups and downs with anything, with any type of creative endeavor. There are always ups and downs. Keep at it, but you also have to know when you've hit your end point with it too, and maybe you need to move on to something else.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks so much for joining us, everybody. This was The Trade, episode 61. Any questions, comments, you can link, links down in the doobly-doo. Please comment below here. Or you can get me on Twitter at Melanie_C. Dave, as always, thank you so much. You're always welcome back.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. I'll see you later. Until next month. Bye.